hopefully the idea are a little bit clearer, and we know at least what are the steps that we have undertaken to update the framework. So these steps are summarized in the next slide. So we started with a kickoff meeting to agree on the expected goals and the working methods. The first task was really to translate the current framework, so the non-updated framework, let's say, into the terms of the new NACE 2.1 classification, which I believe of which you discussed already this morning. So I presume that everybody in the room are familiar with this classification. So after having translated the current concept, let's say in this new language of NACE 2.1, we moved to the theoretical framework, which includes concepts, definitions, and the general ideas of the boundaries of the field. Then it was time to discuss the operational part of the framework, which means reviewing the domains, the cultural functions, and allocate each of the selected economic activities into the matrix, which is the result of the intersection between the cultural domains and the cultural functions. I want to mention then that during this process, we probably realized that we were not dealing with the famous elephant in the room, I would like to say. So we dedicated a full meeting to discuss about what creative sectors are, the concept of creative, and trying to clarify, especially if some of the ambiguities are related to this concept, and if we could use this expression, this term, in our statistical framework, in our statistical context. Then from the last steps of the revision, we really took time for the empirical part of the revision. So with the finalization of the list of the economic activities that are part of the operational scope, and in particular to the correspondence between the economic activities as classified under the NACE classification and the other classifications that we use at Eurostat to produce the statistics, for example, in the area of occupation, international trade, expenditure, etc. Now I would like to go into some of the let's say, key principles or the general provisions of the framework, which will give you hopefully an idea of what the updated framework will look like. So for reason of time, I will just illustrate a few of them, but I think it is important to mention first that the statistical framework is not supposed to provide a definition of culture itself. Because we have anthropological, economic, social elements that are mixed together and that give different definitions. So what we do with our framework is really presenting the perimeter of the economic activities that are included in the statistical scope, again, for statistical purposes only. In this sense, among the different definitions that exist in the theory of the definition, we have chosen what is called the stipulative definition, which consists in indicating what we mean by culture, listing clearly all the components, which in our case are the economic activities. Another important thing to matter is that in order to avoid the risk of confusing our domain with the general concept of creating economy, which can be very broad, we decided that the general heading of the area will remain culture statistics. So it will not include, for example, culture and creative sectors or industries, etc. One other important principle is the fact that the European classification of the economic activities in its latest version will be and is the primary reference for defining the activities that are in the scope. And this is translated in other statistical areas with the use of the official correspondence tables. Another element, we also acknowledge the fact that what is included in the operational scope, that is what the activities for which we will produce the statistics, is not exhaustive of the cultural field in the general sense. So there is more out there, and we gave sort of a new importance to the theoretical scope, which includes also economic activities that have a partially cultural, let's say, component. So due to the limitations in the classifications or in the data, we are not able to compute statistics, but with the task force, we went through the list of the economic activities, and also we decided that new activities are considered partially cultural. Finally, the last element that I would like to share with you, compared to the original formulation of the SSNet framework, we attributed more importance probably to culture and creativity related activities. Because the cultural sector, is composed by a constellation of actors that are essential for the production, dissemination, etc., of cultural contents, even if they are not directly producing cultural content themselves. And on this last point, I have a few examples to show you to make it clear. So I read here, you see it in bold, an extract from the SSNet 2012 report, which reads that related activities are industrial activities that are linked to culture, for example, manufacturing, printing, that transform mass reproduction good into cultural good available for consumption, without being included in the core framework of culture for the production of data. So by contrast, activities such as printing, reproduction of recorded media, manufacturing of some products, crafts, etc., will be considered fully cultural this time. And this is because the creation function is only the first and one of the possible functions of the economic activities, but also we have production, publishing, trade, management, regulation, etc. So this is probably one of the, let's say, most important differences compared to the original formulation of the SSNet framework. So now the culture and creativity related activities, where we can, due to the availability of granular data, they will be considered fully cultural. Another important element concern, as I was saying before, the correspondence between the NACE economic activities and other statistical areas, other classifications. So that is why I titled this slide, the cultural statistics beyond NACE. So one thing that we realized during the work of the task force was that the cultural scope may show differences according to the statistical area. So it's not always very coherent between statistical areas. And when I say areas, I mean employment, trade, consumptions, etc. And this depends on two main factors. So first, granularity of the classification. And here we have two possible cases. So when we do the translation, the correspondence, starting from NACE, we have two possible cases. So we start from NACE and we go toward a less granular classification, or we go toward a more granular classification. So if the target classification is less granular, unfortunately, we will have to exclude some activities from the operational scope, from the statistics produced, because they are too broad and would lead to overestimation. In this case, one example is, for example, culture education, which is fully cultural in this perspective of the NACE classification, but when you translate it into other classifications, for example, trade in services, it is embedded inside the general concept of general education. So in this case, we create sort of a distortion, a non-perfect correspondence between the scope in the scopes of the two classifications. On the contrary, when we go towards a more granular classification, we have sort of the freedom to select more. So in this sense, even if one activity is considered fully cultural under the NACE classifications, we still have the freedom to select some code, to exclude some codes which we deem not fully cultural. So, for example, with the task force, we decided to exclude the printing of commercial catalogs from the scope of trade statistics, even if printing activities are considered fully cultural activities in the sense of the economic activity. So this is one example. The other example of when we don't have a full correspondence between, let's say, statistical areas in the cultural sector is due to the cultural function. So something which can be fully cultural from the side of the production might not be cultural from the side of the consumption. And here, one of the most evident examples is advertising. So some advertising content which is produced by enterprises, by advertising professional, is considered fully cultural creative, but on the contrary, nobody will dare to define watching advertisement on TV an activity of cultural consumption. So these are two practical examples of this, let's say, risk of incoherence between statistical areas, which we tried to identify at least with our work on the revision. Now I will go, I think, towards the conclusion of this presentation with some cases, some examples of how revising a framework is an empirical exercise. It's not just a theoretical one. So
very shortly, please.
Yes, thank you. A couple of minutes, I think. So one of the reasons why we decided to do this update, of course, is because some of the goods and activities that we now have in the cultural sector did not exist before. So one thing that we did was a mapping of what we think we mean by digital culture inside the new classification of the economic activities. So here we have just a few examples of activities that for which we don't need the new and additional category in the next classification, but which we can find in the traditional, let's say, in the traditional form of cultural production. So we have digital publishing, broadcasting or streaming, production of vlogs. We have many more, but this is really just for you to see that also it was really an empirical exercise, because one thing is just mentioning the fact that we have to deal with digital culture. The other thing is trying to reply to practical questions. For example, where do we find Spotify in the international classification, etc. So we hope that now we have a better picture of these, let's say, activities within the general umbrella of the digital culture. A second example, and then I will conclude, it's from the classification of the occupations. So one thing that we did was, of course, to look at the explanatory notes, at the description, at the tasks that the people normally perform in cultural occupations, in order to decide if a new occupation, if you wanted to add a new occupation to our list of cultural occupations. And this was the case, for example, for print, finishing and binding workers, for which we have 45,000 people in Europe. But also we had we wanted to look at the statistics, especially for the cases that we thought were not very clear. For example, the cases of web and multimedia developers. So what we did, we calculated the distribution of these workers across the different economic activities in Europe, and we realized that probably these kind of occupations are more concentrated into computer programming, ICT, data processing kind of activities. So in the end, with the task force, we decided to consider this occupation only as a partially cultural occupation. So this is another example to show you also the empirical side of the revision process. Finally, there are several open matters. I will just mention a few of them because of the time. Maybe I will skip the practical part of the implementation, such as breaking some theories, communication, or the general increase in the figures that we will have due to the change of the framework. But this is important, maybe, which is the estimation method for the partially cultural codes. So as I was mentioning, we selected some new codes that are part of the framework from the theoretical point of view, but for which we will not compute the statistics because they have components which are not cultural. This was always like that in our framework, but we have a new ones with the updated framework. So we will probably need to go into the, let's say, new estimation procedures to estimate the partially cultural components from a general economic activity that is broader than just the cultural component. So for this point, I think the expertise from the member states will be very much appreciated. And then, yes, as Lydia was mentioning before, we will have also to go towards new developments, for example, how to go from national satellite accounts towards a new first European wide cultural satellite account, etc. I hope I took not too much time. Thank you very much. And I'm here also for questions and comments. Thanks.
Thank you very much. We have time for one quick question. Yes, from Milan Denera. Later.
Sorry, yeah, I think Teresa was first, but mine will be really quick. Thank you so much, Andrea. We see you next month. We see each other next month. My question is, because in the morning presentations, we mentioned or promised that the Czech definition of culture will be mainly based on the Eurostat definition. And my question is, do you have in mind a preliminary date for the new Eurostat definition? You're muted, I think.
Andrea, muted. Andrea?
Sorry,
You're muted.
yes. Well, the definition is there, the draft definition is there, we discussed it together, but again, we cannot disclose it before it is agreed at the level of the expert group, which will take place on 25th of March. So if there are no strong oppositions, I presume that in the minutes of that meeting, we will put the new definition. So around the beginning of April, probably we will be able to publish the new definition. Yeah. But this depends on the agreement of 27 member states this time, not only 12.
Thanks.
Thank you very much. And one more from Teresa Rabova, and please shortly.
Hello, I have a very short question about the EU satellite account. I'm interested in this, and you didn't have enough time to explain it. So can will we have the new EU satellite account of culture?
The very quick answer is no. We will not have soon a EU satellite account. We have several member states that are producing satellite accounts in culture. I think around 12, if I'm not wrong. But of course, the methodologies are different across the member states. So there will be some projects. Some of us were imagining a new task force really to produce common guidelines to go towards a European satellite account. The good news on this, with this respect, is that from since a couple of years, I think we have a new business regulation in statistics, which basically for which we now have a full. We have 4 digits level data for all the economic activities, including the economic sector, and in other fields that we see around, for example, in sport. This is facilitating very much the efforts to create satellite accounts in other areas. So I presume that also in the field of culture, it will be a bit easier, but this is something for the future. Thank you.
Thank you.
Andrea, thank you very much as well for your time. Extremely appreciate it. And we're coming to the last point of our today's gathering. It will be a presentation by Catherine Grotz and Thea Richter-Juric from EGMUS about the future of European statistics on museums.
Good afternoon, everyone, and morning. I hope that you hear me. It is a pleasure to be here with you today. And firstly, I would like to thank to the National Information and Consultative Center for Culture for the invitation to the conference. It's really delighted to be here and to have the opportunity to participate. This presentation is a shared effort with my colleague, Catherine Grotz. Just a second to share it. So you do see the presentation?
Yes, we do.
Okay. So let's start right in the middle. So what is EGMUS? It is the only platform and network that gathers data on museum statistics in Europe and is actively working on the long-term goal on providing fully comparable data on museums in Europe. It is a forum to describe, analyze, and work on mutual standards in order to enable harmonization of data. EGMUS encourages professional exchange and learning from each other's practice discussion about important topics and strategic developments in the European museum landscape. It is a voluntary network of colleagues who deal with museum statistics, especially those involved in national level museum statistics, and it's open to all institutions that collect museum statistics. Looking back at the origins, EGMUS is actually a merger of several initiatives from the mid-90s, such as the one from the Institute for Museum Research in Berlin in '95 that was organizing an annual conference on museum statistics since then. At the same time, there were also similar initiatives like the Eurostat pilot project on harmonization of cultural statistics in the EU that later developed into a working group on cultural statistics. And at the same time, the representatives of working group of the Ministries of Culture of Luxembourg and the Netherlands decided to start a group on museum statistics. Throughout the years, EGMUS gathered attendees from around 30 countries, as its geographical scope is Europe in a wider sense. Annual plenary meetings are held once a year in different member states, and there is usually one main topic, and representatives of each country are invited to prepare a presentation regarding that topic. In 2024, the group met in Paris as guests of the French Ministry of Culture to discuss museum statistics with respect to figures on museum staff as well as cultural consumption. Topics of the earlier years included digitalization, virtual attendance and digital participation, cultural policies, audience research, quality of the museum activity, special needs, programs for refugees, social and economic influence of museums, ticket charging, non-visitors, big data, impact of the COVID on museums, etc. I'm delighted to have honor to announce that next EGMUS plenary meeting will be held this year in Prague in cooperation with and hosted by NIPOS, as NIPOS makes part of the EGMUS core group. It will be the first time that EGMUS meeting will take place in Czech Republic, so we are happy to invite you to join this international gathering on museum statistics that will be held in November. The core group coordinates the activities of the group and usually meets once a year in the Institute for Museum Research in Berlin. It currently has representatives from France, Czech Republic, Poland, Netherlands, Croatia, and Germany. The coordinators or the representatives are my colleague Katrin and myself.
Excuse me, Thea, can we have please the visual from the presentation about the date of the upcoming meeting? We're still having the mission of EGMUS. Maybe
Okay,
to adjust the presentation.
But the meeting is not.
Okay, I'm just making sure you want to be on the page 5. Thank you.
Okay,
But the slides are frozen. It didn't start at the beginning. It is only frozen at mission of EGMUS.
Yes,
okay, just let me.
Do
you see it now?
Yes, now it's progressing.
Yes,
page number 3. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. As we have heard, EGMUS is a collaborative network of institutions throughout Europe that collects and makes accessible national museum data on a voluntary basis. National data providers are quite heterogeneous. For instance, some are ministries of culture, as in the case of France. Some are departments of national statistical institutes, as in the case of the Czech Republic. But there are also national research institutions that collaborate with statistical institutes on national and federal level, such as in the case of Germany. As you may imagine, the road to fully comparable data on European museums is quite rocky, and the EGMUS group has been working on different levels to realize this goal. So based on the international standards and practices in the participating countries, the group developed a standard questionnaire as a recommendation for the network members. And also the group created a first provisional table of key indicators for comparison, the so-called LOCMI table, which is a bridged list of key museum indicators, originally designed by the Luxembourg and Dutch members. It has been extensively discussed and revised, but at the end it was adopted as the main instrument to collect comparable data from EGMUS members to this date. The idea was to easily deliver figures from national statistics onto a yearly basis with goal to contribute to collecting and publishing the data online to be used by experts and cultural policymakers throughout Europe. But due to diverging data collection practices and because not all countries provide data on a regular basis, these tables are far from providing overall comparability. Nevertheless, there is quite some potential in the existing data sources to contribute to comparability if metadata are taken into consideration. So we would like to, just a second, we would like to, okay, do you see now the next slides? Yeah. We would like to
We're
present.
still at page number 3.
No, slides
We're still
frozen.
at page number 3.
I don't know what
Feel free to click on the one that you want to present on the left.
Yeah, I'm trying to see the slide analyzing data collection methodology.
No, we're still stuck at page number 3. What is EGMOS?
I don't know what actually happened. Just a second to try to. Yeah, okay. I'm sorry.
It's okay. We still have 10 minutes.
Okay.
But if it doesn't work, we can also open the presentation on our computer and present it from our side. So you can try again, and then we can do it like that.
Yeah, it should be on page number 7, and now maybe, yeah, okay. I'm sorry for this inconvenience. So the point was that we would like to present the results from the efforts in harmonizing activities made over the past years, which are centered on the meta level of the data collection methodology. And if Catherine would like to continue.
Thank you. Well, harmonizing data on museum statistics is not only a question of indicators, but it's also how these surveys are conducted and which basic concepts and operational definitions of the term museum stand behind them. And EGMO's harmonizing activities over the past years have therefore centered on analyzing the meta level of data collection methodology, and we would like to briefly present how we went about and present some first results of the analysis. And in 2017, the idea of a country methodological reporting template for museum statistics in order to provide more insight and value to the figures which are collected was first presented at a plenary meeting. And it started as an initiative of Eurostat, whose colleagues actively engaged in the subsequent working group led by Nico Heerschap of Statistics Netherlands. However, due to the change of ICOM's museum definitions, which happened in Prague in 2019, the subsequent pandemic and a wave of retirements and shifting priorities, the project eventually took more time to achieve the operational phase. And in the past 2 years, Nico Heerschap and Milan Dedera from the Czech Republic have finalized the country methodological reporting template and sent it out to all EGMOS members. And by mid-2024, 19 out of 31 countries had filled out the template, and first conclusions could be presented at the last plenary meeting in Paris. And the overall goal of the reporting template is firstly, to gather information on the context of the data, the variables and classifications, the definitions and methodologies used, and secondly, to relate this metadata to the actual figures presented on the EGMOS website. So which kind of information countries collect and produce on museums, including a museum register? How countries produce their museum statistics on the supply side? How countries define a museum and how they deal with museum-like institutions, which statistical unit is used for the output, which classifications are applied, and how the core structural variables are defined. Next slide, please. And of course, there's a need to collect more data and to motivate all member countries to contribute, but from the analysis of the 19 reports, the museum statistics are already clearly emerging, both in terms of common and differences that have to be overcome. And some of the main results are that still not all countries collect the same information. You see that on the table to the left. However, there are some indicators that most partners agree on. The institutional embedment of national museum statistics is quite heterogeneous. Thea already mentioned it. And numbers are collected 1/3 each by government bodies, ministries of culture, etc., national statistics institutes, or dedicated museum institutions. So there's really a heterogeneous and very evenly distributed institutional setting of collecting museum data. Most countries, over 80%, raise their numbers once a year, publish within a year, and use an electronic questionnaire. And over 90% aim for integral sample but only 6 in 10 countries conduct surveys in a setting that is mandatory for museums. And that's really important if you really have museums that have to give you their numbers or you don't. And the problem of non-response in these cases where you don't have this mandatory setting, the problem of non-response is also treated very differently. For example, 1/3 of the countries do not take any action if they don't get a response. Another third do an extra recalling, and another third applies statistical imputation. And the degree of formalizing the museum population varies. The majority, 7 out of 10, but not all countries use an official museum register as their population frame. And the definition of a museum varies between the countries. The top 4 criteria are, firstly, access to the public, secondly, own collection, thirdly, exhibition activities, and fourth, conservation activities. And the elements of the new ICOM definition so far play a very subordinated role. 7 out of 10 countries use the administrative unit as a statistical unit, but the treatment of multi-museums under one management can be handled very differently between countries. And for different reasons, most countries include some of the museum-like institutions in their museum statistics. Mostly, this concerns archaeological sites, exhibition halls, and galleries. Next slide.
And just a few more minutes. Thank you.
Yes, it's the last slide. It's our future challenges and activities. You've seen the challenges on the rocky road to harmonize European museum statistics are multifold. However, EGMOS is determined to work on all levels to keep up discussions and to kindle the spirit of approximation among all partners. Bear in mind that all of this is taking place against the backdrop of radical change by the way museums see themselves and the demands that stakeholders in societies place on them. This becomes clearest when one considers the new ICOM definition of museums, and this new definition includes 30 new words or concepts reflecting the evolving nature of museums. And this is in line with some of the major changes in the role of museums and recognizes the importance of inclusion, community participation, and sustainability. And these new concepts are much more difficult to operationalize than the elements of the old ICOM definition. And this will be one of the major challenges and will provide much material for debate in the coming years in the EGMOS group. And in this respect, we see a need for action concerning the standard questionnaire because there has been an addendum of a set of question in digitization in 2019, but the last full version of the questionnaire was adopted in 2013. And there is, of course, not the new museum definition yet. It has to be considered. Also, we need to proceed with translating the results of our methodological reporting template into specific steps towards more harmonized museum statistics in the form of a methodological manual. And this does not mean that every country has to produce museum statistics in the same way, but agree on ways to translate national museum data to a common core. And of course, we have to keep up. We have to keep up with the data gap that we have due to the pandemic. And due to a generational change, we have also lost contact to some of our country partners, which we need to restore. We are working on the website that urgently needs technical revamping, and we are currently in the middle of a relaunch to do this. And to tackle these challenges, it means a lot of data management and administrative tasks, and this does exceed the voluntary commitment of the network members, and we were able to mobilize additional human resources from the Institute for Museum Research to support EGMOS in fulfilling these tasks. And of course, after we renewed the platform as a backbone, we need to enhance visibility of museum statistics as a strategical source and a source for European benchmarking that has an added value beyond just being used by data analysts. And this is where I would like to close, and hopefully we have at least time for one question. Thank you very much.
Definitely, we will. Thank you very much. So time for a question. Coming from Milan Dedera as first.
Okay, I thought that there's no question, so I just wanted to say that we are really looking forward to host ECMUS in Prague in November. Me here, Juraj, and all the other colleagues.
Thank you, Milan, very much. And one more point from Andrea.
Yeah, I take the floor. I just wanted to know, according to what opinion, which is the, let's say, most harmonized of the items that you presented? You have a number of visits, you have several items. Is there anything that we are confident that is measured in the same way across the countries? So the 14 countries that you have data, can we say that at least one of these is really well harmonized across the countries?
So far, actually, no, not really. But I'm not sure. What we do is that we do have at least probably ways of sifting out data that is, to aggregate data in an according way. But other than that, at the moment, there's no indicator, as far as I know, that is really conform across the countries.
Okay.
Please correct me, Milan. You know the numbers better than I, but
yeah, you're right. But of course, not all the European countries are even member of ECMUS, so that might be the reason. But there are some strong data, I think, that where the majority of the European countries have the common definition, which might be, for instance, the number of visits, which is quite an easy indicator.
You're right.
And it can be aggregated very well within the countries that are members of ECMUS.
Okay, good. And the metadata is explained from all the countries exactly what they mean by that, right? So
exactly.
we at least understand well what they mean by the figures.
It is already explained, and this report that we are doing now is a step towards understanding even better, and also to enter discussion where things might, make no sense, or where it might be easy to correct them. So this is the first step, and I remember Eurostat was involved in the beginning also, and I think this is I'm absolutely with you, Andrea. This is a very big board we have to drill here, but we're not giving up, and that's why we are here.
Thank you for your reply.
So thank you very much to all of the speakers, organizing team, and participants who will receive presentations from the speakers by the end of the week. And děkujeme všem, kteří měli svou prezentaci, kteří se zúčastnili. Velké poděkování organizačnímu týmu. Vaše prezentace, nebo přesně prezentace, které dnes tady zazněly, dostanete na své e-mailové adresy a také tam bude způsob, jak získat časopis Statistika. A my všem moc děkujeme, ať se vám daří. Thank you to all of you. Have a beautiful day.
Děkujeme and thank you.
Thank you, goodbye.